All right. Are we ready to dive in?
I think we're ready to dive in. Finally.
Finally. Hi, Jess.
Hi, Christian. This is fun.
This is fun.
Yeah. Welcome to our first podcast. I'm
Yes.
Jessica Vandenberg and my lovely colleague Christian and friend Christian Denny.
Yes. We've been friends a long time, haven't we, Jess? It's
Long
been over
time.
20 years.
Yeah. We first met in 2003? 2002, yes. Oh my goodness. So we're at 22, 23 years. Yes. And I think we're here today because we've been having hours worth of conversations. We have a business together called Maverick Strategies and Mail. We've had a business together for almost 20 years. We also are both mothers, different ages of kids, and kind of have thoughts and opinions. And they don't always align, but mostly they align, right?
That's right. That's right. I actually think that, for most women, that layer of motherhood just really affects the way you look at the world. And for us as political pros all these years, it really, changes the way that you look at things. And you and I have years, decades of experience doing this. So it's just interesting to watch. And of course, we find ourselves at this very historic time, in more ways than one, right?
Right.
And at this point, you and I have kind of seen it all.
Well, you think you do.
That's
And
right.
then you see what happened this year.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And, the fact that we've been doing this so long, and then the fact that we're moms, and then we've seen this transformation as far as how ideas and information flows. And I just think it's just an interesting time to kind of talk through some of these issues that have been talked about in the political sphere for a long, long time. But I just think it presents itself as some, to be refreshed. That's my point.
Agree. And I think, there's something to be said about women not feeling like they had a voice all the time. And then now I think women have more of a voice. And for me, I love podcasts. You love podcasts.
Yes, I do.
And we wanted to sort of talk through things that we can normally talk through, but also bring people in
Yes.
that have unique perspectives. I am longtime political person. Obviously worked with Christian for a long time, worked across the country for a long time, worked on Capitol Hill, did a bunch of different work, now work with clients in mail and in project management. But, 7 years ago, I became a mom, a single mom by choice. And it completely changed everything that I did about my life, and changes, where your priorities are, but also gives you a different sort of skin in the game in
That's
a way.
right. That's right.
I didn't know until I knew, which I say to Christian a lot. And now I know a little bit more, and I wade through the process. And she's been indispensable advice giver to me, but also a very good friend and business partner. So I'm very lucky that we're in this, and I'm happy we're doing this podcast together too.
Yes, me too. Me too. And like you said, we talk about this a lot. So might as well just get it out there in the real world and see what other people think. But, you mentioned your journey with your daughter, and it's not just the parenthood part of it. Because at Genevieve, it's not only just the fact that she's your child and she's her life is just beginning. I'm kind of in the same boat with my kids, although my kids are older. I have almost 2 adults at this point. I know, can you believe it? I just cannot believe it. But, I learned through you. And I think vice versa, right?
Yes.
So and I think that's kind of part of the sisterhood. We learn from each other. And even though my kids are older, I still learn from your experience. So
yeah, same. I think it's important in this journey to have mom friends. It's important to have all kinds of friends, but also not just mom friends who are going through the same age, but mom friends who have been through it. So you can say, oh, how did you weather this? Or what do I have in the future? What do I have to look forward to? What should I be thinking about? But also just, having those discussions is it's extremely important, because you're right, it's a sisterhood. And usually, even though I'm a single mom by choice, there's a default to the mom.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an important aspect to remember, because it's usually on when I talk to my friends in the neighborhood, my other friends who are moms who are in, like, let's say, heterosexual relationships. There's a default parent in mostly any relationships, and it generally is the mom in those relationships. So kudos to the moms who are the default moms, or the primary parent as well.
And I think you can agree that a lot of questions that you asked me about child rearing, if you want to say it that way, and by the way, my mantra is every child is different, even the ones that have this, same mom and dad raised in the same household, they are very different, or can be. But that I say a lot when you ask me questions, I don't know, or they'll get out, they'll grow out of it or whatever. There's a lot of that. Like,
I
you
think
just
the
get
best
through
piece
it.
of advice you gave me, and I give to other moms, is that you'll always know your kid the best. No matter if you deal with a pediatrician, a doctor, a lawyer, somebody who you think is a child psychologist, no matter what. And the things that we've been through, we definitely, that has been an important piece of my journey for sure. And I want to, as we get into the dive in piece of this, I think what our goal is to talk about 3 different subjects. Maybe we do it separately, maybe we do it together, but I'll introduce the first one if that's okay. And I'm going to introduce it in this way. A year ago, things looked very different. The political landscape looked very different. We had, different visions, I think, we were watching the administration go through what it was going through. Obviously successful, but we're at a point last year where it looked like Kamala Harris was maybe on the ballot, maybe not on the ballot. And what was happening a year ago is my daughter Genevieve and I were lucky enough. Kamala Harris came to Des Moines. We were lucky enough to meet her, and I said, "Hey Genevieve, we're going to meet the Vice President of the United States." And she said, of the whole country? And I said, yes, she runs the whole country. And she said, I think she's brown. And she said, I said, she is brown. And she said, I love being brown. And so after that, and then we met the vice president. We were just in a line, and we took a picture, and I got a picture separate. Thank you to Megan Jones, who worked for the vice president at the time. It was one of those situations where the reflection of a woman, and especially a brown woman, who could become president transcends things beyond what we understand. Yep. And I think we've experienced this before working for women politicians, but I don't think ever on this level with Hillary, for sure. And we can talk about that in a minute. I think we will. But this is a different experience. So to Kamala's credit, she moved in this way where she was supportive of Joe Biden. And now I think our first, deep dive is like a woman now. Like, what got us to this point, and how do we think this is going to go for the next, 90 days or so in the middle of the convention?
And I think, that's right. We should point out, and folks probably know, that starting today is the Democratic convention in Chicago. Last night we had a speaker. Hillary Clinton was one of the speakers. There was many people that spoke, but the main speakers were Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden. So, and then of course there's going to be, throughout the week, there'll be Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, and then Tim Walz when he's nominated, and then of course Kamala Harris. So there's a lot to be looking forward to. That's how I describe it. But let's go back a minute to your point about her. And she's kind of, and I'm borrowing probably a phrase from the press, is that she's a little bit of the accidental candidate. Yep. And let's just walk through a minute, how that came to be. You mentioned a year ago, like you said, Jess, there was a little bit of question as to whether or not she's going to be on the ticket. There was also a little bit of a question as to whether or not Joe Biden would actually run. And there was also, again, all this simmering about this time last year. Well, no one had a clear picture about who Kamala Harris was. She kind of, and you jump in here if you disagree, she was almost in the background. Now, that doesn't mean she was not doing anything. She was just kind of more in the background, in my opinion. And I always felt like they needed to utilize her a little bit more or more effectively. And I think that was, at this point, when I look back, I think it was more of a stylistic issue as opposed to some sort of concrete issue that they, or concrete decision they made to, put her in the background. What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, of course we're not
Sure.
privy to this information. My estimation is they didn't know what to do with her. They weren't sure. As the first woman vice president, the first woman of color, they generally want to underestimate, underutilize, under expectation. And then if something goes awry or she acts in a certain way, then they want to undermine the situation. And I don't know if that was the case. I think obviously like she's been through her own journey, and I'm not suspecting she's a perfect candidate, but because we were in Iowa, I was in Iowa when she ran, and she couldn't quite figure it out. But I think I got to be honest, in this space and time, do I think a woman could become the nominee and win the nomination in a conventional way, or win the presidency in a conventional way? I don't think that potentially that the party would allow that in the way that it would need to happen.
Yeah.
And we see that historically, right?
Yeah.
You can win the nomination, but it's difficult to win the general election. But now we have a truncated campaign. We went from Trump being on top to a complete momentum shift to 2 or 3 weeks of really awesome Olympics. And then now we're into the convention. So that's all. This is a great question, but it feels like when everybody got behind her, which would have also been difficult in any other circumstance. You tell me what you think. Like everybody got unified. The money started pouring in. The team that wasn't even hers kind of solidified. They added people to that team, and now we're sort of in this everybody's like gelling together and kumbaya. That's what I was, a kumbaya moment for her.
Right.
So anyway, I think she's risen to it.
Yes, me too.
And if she hadn't, people would be looking for that. So I don't know. Let's see what happens. I mean, you talk about your thoughts.
Yeah. So, going back, to the very displeasurable date of June 27th, which was the date of that disastrous debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. We can talk about what we expected from that debate, but it's kind of moot. It's ancient history at this point. And I remember being very hopeful going into that night, but then it became very clear very early on in this debate that this was going to be a disaster. And we all kind of knew it, right? We all felt like this was probably going to happen, but we were hope for the best, right? So after that debate, and then things were kind of in this bit of flux, even though at the time Joe Biden was like, I'm not getting out. In fact, they really tried to pass it off as a one-time thing. And there were many reasons why they could not do that. And I was so angry. And I know, Jess, you know this, because I was like, we have no time even though it was possible via the rules and all that for him to be replaced on the ticket, at the top of the ticket, it just felt like it was hopeless. It was too late,
Well, I also think knowing you, and I'll say this, I think you were very angry, and I understood it, because I think that when you lived the Trump presidency, you lived a very unique perspective. We felt like because of our family that there was a non-acceptance by people of who we are, but we weren't threatened.
Yes.
We didn't, my kid wasn't specifically called out and threatened. So to live that situation and then to go into, now Trump is going to win.
Right.
Which is, post convention, it feels like Trump is going to win, and we're going to relive this, and even worse, probably coming up, that anger is understood. That's
Right.
what I'd say from a personal perspective.
Oh, 1,000%. I mean, and I live in DC, so just
I'm in Iowa, so it's a little bit different.
yeah. All right. And so, for example, the idea of reliving that whole thing again just was, it was kind of impossible to bear. But I will say this, that, and you mentioned it earlier, that the fact that we only had this very small window of time to kind of get used to the idea of Kamala at the top of the ticket, I think worked so far, right, has worked in her favor for the reasons you mentioned. That it unified everybody quickly, knowing what we faced in terms of the possibility of another Donald Trump presidency or term. But also, and you know this as well as I do, the primary process is such that she probably would have been pushed too far to the left during that process.
Yeah.
And so the one thing that I'm still kind of in shock in terms of something I didn't expect as it relates to Kamala being at the top of the ticket is how unprepared the Trump campaign seems to be.
Yeah.
It's like they never thought it would happen.
Yeah.
And now they seem completely caught off guard.
So I wonder, but and I don't think it's worth going into this. I wonder if the campaign is prepared, but Trump himself is not prepared.
That's a good point. And as we know, I mean, we've all worked with candidates.
They want to say borders are. They want to say liberal San Francisco. Woman. They want to say radical, and they do say that. But Trump can't help himself. He says she's stupid. She laughs weird. You know what I mean? And so I think that would make them cringe, right? The campaign itself, because what they know is if they're going to drive people away, that especially women who probably supported him, potentially suburban, ex-Serbian women, calling another woman stupid, maybe too much. I don't know. I don't know
Right.
what drives these people, but
Well,
not necessarily.
And that kind of brings us in the context of a woman being at the top of the ticket. That takes us back to Hillary, when she was at the top of the ticket, and all those tactics, the tactics you just mentioned that Donald Trump used, they seem to work, which I agree with you. I think and one thing that you and I know so well is that you don't, as somebody who works in politics like we do, and the goal is, when you work in politics, is to win. That's the goal. It's hard stop, right? But all the tactics, he's trying to rerun the 2016 campaign. That's my point. And that never works, right? Because campaigns are snapshots in time, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I think that all these tactics are not going to work against Kamala. And there's a couple reasons why. I think my opinion is that, first of all, Hillary was not that well liked going into the race. She was more defined in the eyes of the general public. But I don't think she's as warm. The thing you mentioned about introducing your daughter to Kamala and those kinds of things. I mean, I think we all have stories like that. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with not being super touchy-feely. You know that. But I do think that people expect that from a woman, right? They expect a woman to have softer edges. And you and I we've worked with women. I mean, you know this. We've worked with women that we're trying to soften their edges a little bit, And is it right or is it wrong or is it fair? No. But do you want to win?
So I think if you're talking about Hillary or whatever, I had a moment, I didn't work with her, but I had a moment where she remembered me and it was really thoughtful. It was a long time ago. And I don't know if she remembered me or not, but it was like a moment.
Sure.
But also, like, I think what you have to remember, and what I talk to candidates about, even male candidates, is like people vote on values or feelings, and not just women, or men do it too. And the thing about talking constantly about policy positions or what's happening globally or all this sort of stuff is like people care about those issues, but they want to know that you care about them, and they want to have this feeling that's a little bit different than just, hey, let's talk about policy. Like, put it towards why, put it towards the why. And perhaps Hillary was too far away from the why, because of her longtime career and kind of where she came from.
Yes.
Bill, when he ran for president, wasn't far away from the why.
Right.
Right. So it creates a different dynamic. I think Kamala definitely feels like she's not far from the why, or not. Even Biden was, right. Even if he could portray that working class sort of thing, it's like, it's hard when you are in a different experience. You've been in a bubble for a while. But I don't know. She definitely gives you a feeling of, she understands you. She talks more economic policy. She talks more individual, that sort of stuff when I see her talk. So that could make a difference with your edges. I don't know.
Well,
do you think that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think her instincts are just different. And again, different being the key word, because
different lens.
Right.
Different lens.
And right. Absolutely. And I don't want to imply that Hillary's approach was wrong. It's not that. It's just, Kamala has more ease. I think you can agree. I can't think of a specific example right this moment, but watching Hillary try to connect, there was this one time when she went on Saturday Night Live, this is Hillary, and she did a cameo on Saturday Night Live with, what's her name?
Yeah.
The woman that played her on Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
And I can't think of her name. She's very popular. It's going to come to me in a minute. But she, and that's supposed to be fun. And it was just it was just awkward. And I think that, and
Kamala dances,
right.
She listens to rap, and she listens to different music, and she talks about, it's more like generational.
Yes.
I would say, like a generational expectation of what you're wearing and what you show off, but also there's like different expectations for her. But I think like her part is, this is super interesting. And like now we're, and you said what, we're in August. We have a couple of months. Like how is this momentum going to stay? One of the things that we want to talk about, I know a little bit, was Tim Walz, but I think maybe we should talk about, since you're, I've done communications, but I'm not a communications professional. I don't live in the media circle,
right.
And have insights into the media circle like you do often, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe ad nauseum even, I don't know. But we were having a discussion with us. It's like, what does Kamala need to do with the way the media, the way people get their information? What does she need to do now? Like, the conventional wisdom is she needs to sit down and do an interview. And what do you think about that? Like, what do you, what if you were her advisor, which we could both be, but we chose different paths.
Yes.
Let's acknowledge that.
Yes.
If you were her advisor, what would you tell her to do in the next 80 days or 90 days or wherever?
Well, so as you know, I live with a journalist, a Washington journalist, and he's very much on this bandwagon. She needs to answer the tough questions. Okay, well, all right, let's just think about that a minute. So,
I mean, I watched Meet the Press last week for the first time in a long time, and I watched the questions that were asked, and I'm like,
yeah. Now, here's
do we need to do gotcha questions?
Right.
Is that what we need to? Yeah. So anyway.
Well, and to your point, who says? Okay, so, and again, going back to our little, what's the goal to win? So, first of all, I think if I had to prioritize what she's doing, I would say you need to get out there. You need to go with, she obviously chose her vice presidential pick, and he needed to be introduced. And they've been doing that, which is very important, as you know. But also, and this is my guess is that behind the scenes, they are prepping her for this big interview, whatever that looks like, with all the tough questions. And she does have to answer for everything. She has to answer for the far left. She has to answer for Joe Biden, anything he's done or said, okay, because she is a part of his administration. So big, tough interview, right? So my guess is that they've been prepping her for this. And if I was advising her, I'd say I would rather have her prepped and ready for this interview than rushing into it just because the national media is, whining about it. And what comes to mind, Jess, is Sarah Palin, the whole "I can see Russia from my backyard" or whatever she said, right? Not to say that would happen to Kamala. I think Kamala is much more informed, but you see my point. So again, I think the stakes are a little higher, don't you, for women?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So I would rather have her prepped. And not to mention, she's got a debate coming up. So there's going to be plenty of time for these hard questions. Okay? So all of that is just...
Do you think like the American people want that? Or do you think the DC press wants that? Because it feels like she hasn't avoided questions. I mean, maybe it feels like they haven't been getting their questions answered. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think we're going to see... Here's what I think. First of all, it's a total construct of the DC press corps. They're feeling a little left out. And I know she's been going to
because they had opportunities probably as a vice president to interview her often. And probably didn't take the opportunity.
That's right. Not to mention, when you're the VP and you know exactly what I'm talking about, you're so constrained. I think we're going to see a different Kamala. She doesn't have to run it through the president. She has to go through the West Wing to find out, can I say this or that or whatever? Because we all know they were in complete control. So,
So what do you think are the hot button topics or issues that either feed the beast or for the voters? Because I think the voters probably want to listen to a little bit more of an economic policy. I mean, that's where I think it starts. I mean, I think she's done a great job on abortion and had that conversation. Something obviously we've talked about Joe Biden wasn't willing to do, which is a huge problem.
Huge.
In Iowa 2 weeks ago or a month and a half ago, the Supreme Court upheld a law banning abortion. Then it became enacted, which is very confusing to the doctors now, but we have a ban on abortion here. So and I know it's happening in many states, a third of the states or whatever. It's a big deal. There's a lot of big deals that are happening right now. But what do you think, either to maybe there's two categories: feed the beast and what voters want to hear. And maybe they're the same.
Yeah. Well, I actually think they're different. And I think the hard questions are going to be the border. I don't know if folks remember, but she was technically the border czar or whatever. Okay.
Yes.
The border. And then all issues that are very important to the far left, which is Gaza, Israel. And we can talk about that in a minute because I think it's important. And then some details on her economic policy, but those are a little less important in terms of the way I believe, because Trump has a lot of loose ends when it comes to his economic policy. So that's kind of way down third on the list. But the two things where she could get caught in a jam: border, because, she can run into issues with the far left on that, right? And then the Israel-Gaza situation, which is potentially, could be inflammable. Now, knock on wood, right? There weren't, and I've talked to my husband who's at the convention, and he said he doesn't see a lot of protesters or anything like that. Secretary Blinken, I think this morning or yesterday, announced a potential ceasefire with Israel. That'll help. But I guess we should package that in any issues that are really important to the far, far left. That's where the Trump campaign hopes to trip her up. Now, in terms of how do you throw the far left a bone? Well, if we can get something, I'm not sure. What do you think?
Well, I think it's interesting because I see it divided a little bit differently. I see there are people obviously who care about what's happening in Gaza. And I think most people agree that the policy has not gone well, regardless of where you are. what we're doing is not working, and it hasn't been working, and there's not real acknowledgement to that, right? Even though we're for a ceasefire and all this sort of stuff, and I'm not an expert on any level on this, so I hesitate to sort of go. But I also think like there's just a few things when you say far left, I don't like, I sort of put them in a different category too. But I think there's like, hey, when I talked to my friend who came up the other day, who isn't particularly political, but follows it, probably supports Democrats, like probably a moderate that supports Democrats. He said, I feel a whole new, he lives in Houston. I feel a whole new energy now, like a whole new energy. And I think that piece, and I don't know how to answer the question on that piece, but if there's a way to keep that energy moving, to feel like the next generation is coming in, like we don't have to have the Trump, the Biden, the Clinton, the Bush, the legacy, but we have people who have different lenses and they're coming in and they're having a conversation that we care about. The young voters that you have talked to, Christian is also a professor at Columbia University in her spare time. And she talks to a lot of young people who have like really great ideas, but haven't really been interested in the process. It feels like they're interested in the process. I would say like we're in a situation where maybe Black and brown voters were in a way turned off or listening and open, and they probably maybe still are to Trump. Like these are the coalitions that, and I think the press overuses the word coalition because they want to be like the Obama coalition, which by the way was, 20 years ago. That's a whole different coalition. Right. And then, the Biden coalition and this sort of stuff. And you can argue like there was a Biden coalition, but really it's just a bunch of people who didn't want Trump to stay in, and they actually kind of showed up. But this is a whole different situation where voters who came out of the woodwork for Trump, maybe that situation of those voters who said no way, or they're brand new voters will say, hey, I'm interested. So I don't know what the issue is that gets them to stay motivated. And it could be just the personality themselves because, we've seen that situation before, but that's my hope for the next few days.
I think you just hit something there. I think we have the potential for this to be a little bit of a reverse kind of situation from 2016. So because Trump is the known now, whereas then he was the unknown, and people just knew they didn't want her, Hillary.
Right.
So they were willing to say, okay, let's try this. Now that doesn't give Kamala enough credit, but I did want to mention it because you said it, you just said it. So,
or they stayed home.
Right. Or they stayed home because they don't feel like there's any
I mean, Michelle Obama talks about that a lot, right? She's like, she was heartbroken by these voters who supported them, but didn't see the
that's right.
necessity to keep moving, that things would just stay the same or however they were feeling. And maybe, that's the issue I think that we have as political consultants or people who are interested in democracy to say, okay, what are we talking about? And maybe we're getting back to the point on Kamala. What are we talking about that engages people, that people care about? Not just like what we're polling or what matters, but like as you're going through, I was talking about some folks here, and like there's a district in Iowa that lost a hospital, and they have to OBGYN have to drive an hour and a half to get care. And there's, OBGYN deserts here in a big way. 33 counties don't have hospitals in them. We're losing our education system. And like these things were, when I started out in politics, were concepts to be grasped, were things to tell a candidate to talk about. And now they're very real in our life. Like if you want to talk about education, let's talk about what our personal stories are, because they're very personal, right? And so I think that's where there's this thing where you feel like a connection to someone that I don't think folks felt a connection to in a long time.
Right. I look, I mean, we talked about this so much during the Biden administration. We know why Biden won, or how Biden won. Okay. And we've all known Joe Biden. Everybody knows Joe Biden, but there's always been something missing, right? And we all thought that once he became president and everybody got, whatever, comfortable with him, but it never happened. And what we started seeing was a lot of Democrats. This is another kind of answer to the question about what they should be doing now. Well, we forget Kamala Harris and Tim Walz had to unite the party first. I mean, it was a divided party with Joe Biden at the top of the ticket. I mean, there was that, okay? None of these people were going to vote for Donald Trump. It wasn't that kind of thing. But we needed every Democrat to turn out. I mean, that's just the way it is. So, but I think that, to your point, this momentum, this energy, whatever, I also have a theory about, we've known for a long time, years practically, that nobody liked the choices, the Donald Trump versus Joe Biden rematch. Nobody wanted that. The voters were screaming that from the top of their lungs, in my opinion. And I always felt like that there was a possibility that the first party that dumped their old guy, that they would be rewarded. And
interesting. Oh, that's interesting.
By like independence and, and so I think maybe this is what we're seeing.
Well, I think, we have a few more minutes left.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring up one more thing that we probably can't deep dive into, but we're here for empowering women, but we have this interesting situation now where we have a vice presidential candidate that came on board, who's like sort of a breath of fresh air.
Fresh air.
I don't know. And in 2005, I worked in Minnesota, and we were traveling down Owatonna. It's not very far from the Iowa border anyway, but I saw him speak, and I'm not saying I can see anything, but like when you meet those people, you're like, and I remember texting or emailing with the DCCC at the time. I was like, because it was a hard campaign in that district, and he won. But I was like, he's kind of special, you just could tell. But and it's not like I followed him the whole time or watched him, but we're neighboring states, and he would always like tweet things like when the bad legislation was happening in Iowa, he would tweet, if you need help or care, come to Minnesota.
Yes.
And so like, and Pritzker was doing the same thing, so it was really cool. But anyway, breath of fresh air for Tim Walz. So.
And I totally agree. And I didn't know that much about him. Of course, I learned about him with all the things that happened in Minnesota, George Floyd, and all these things that were newsworthy. I did learn about him. But to your point, we expect her to pick somebody who's special, right? But this guy, the more you learn, there's nothing not to like. Now, I know that sounds, like spin coming from, me, this lifelong Democrat, but I don't know. He's different.
So I wanted to mention something because I obviously have friends in Minnesota and friends who aren't political, but follow politics. And what they were, when we were talking about we were sort of going back and forth on text chain, all of my high school friends, and who's going to be the vice presidential candidate. And then it was like looking like Tim Walz, and both of my friends, or my friends who live up there, all were very excited about that. But more excited about Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan becoming governor. So that was very interesting. And so I was asking my political friends about that, and they're all very excited for this Indigenous woman to become governor. So like even Tim Walz moving to vice president creates a space for women, another woman of color who will be featured prominently. So we're hoping to do a deep dive into that in a future episode. But anyway, I don't know, Christian, this is a good place maybe to wrap it up. Because I think we could go on forever, but anyway, to those of you listening, thank you. We would love to be engaged. For those of you, probably only people who know us are listening, send us a text or an email. Big thanks to Grace, who's doing our behind the scenes work and got us to the place where we could actually do this as mothers who can't focus on anything other than what we're doing day to day. But we're very excited to have these conversations, and thank you to Christian too. This has been really fun.
Yeah, this is fun, and we, there's the best is yet to come, right, Jess?
That's right. As always.